The Pelicans front office is ranked second to last per CBS. Not great. Good news. Joe Dumars has multiple ways to prove that ranking wrong. It's Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Pelicans. I'm your host, Jake Madison. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Join all the action at FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer this MLB season. The Pelicans front office ranks second to last per Sam Quinn and CBS Sports, and that's what I want to talk about here. Honestly, I was trying to find a way to push back on this. And I think there's a couple of things in there that you can push back on. But when you look in kind of the grand scheme of the NBA, where the Pelicans fall, the way they are operating right now, it's tough to make an argument for not this. There's only one team ranked behind the Pelicans. You can probably guess who it is. It's the Sacramento Kings. But when you look at the teams ahead of them, I can't really make an argument to even get the Pelicans at 26, 20, 24, 25, something along those lines. The biggest knock on the Pelicans per Sam Quinn, and you should read this article, is really the lack of vision, right? He starts off talking about how the Pelicans walked away from the Derik Queen trade about as unscathed as possible. Queen and Kingston Flemings are probably roughly equivalent as prospects. That's who was taken with the fifth overall pick that went to the Clippers. With Queen perhaps having more value by virtue of playing the scarcer position. Failing to protect their own pick wasn't even the most irresponsible component in the whole trade he calls enormously irresponsible here. And it was the way they went about it, kind of trading that pick around. Essentially, it was 2 first-round picks to get Queen as well. Then they go on to talk, look, it worked out. At a certain point, we talk a lot about process over results, but results are also what matters here. And I still very much think Queen can be a good player in the NBA and has shown a lot of flashes for what was a pretty raw prospect kind of as a rookie. That passing ability and the unique skill set he has, that's not something to joke about. Even though his defense leaves a lot to be desired, I don't know if he'll ever be an elite rebounder or a rim protector. There's questions if he's a 4 or a 5. We'll get into the fit with him and Zion Williamson in this show. When you look at this, he's still enormously talented and the type of player that is someone you can absolutely build around. The rest of this article here, when talking about the Pelicans, talks about their lack of movement here and just the overall questions you have around this team. Similar questions that we've talked a lot about, right? Mentioned that Jamal Mosley is a strange choice to coach a team that badly needs offensive creativity to make the clunky Zion Williamson, Derik Queen fit work. He couldn't figure out how to make the similarly awkward but more talented Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner fit work in Orlando. It still isn't clear why they didn't want to just keep Jose Alvarado. They still haven't been able to do much because of Jordan Poole's contract and all of those things. They didn't add their first veteran on a standard contract until August 17th when it was Trendon Watford. And while I like Trendon Watford in that show talking about that, I was like, this is the type of move the Pelicans should make. That shouldn't be the offseason move that kind of defines what you did, right? Watford's good, but he's a partially guaranteed minimum deal for a reason here. Good might even be a stretch, right? He's an NBA rotation guy on the back end of things here. Sam Quinn goes on to say, the thing keeping the Pelicans out of the 30th spot, and really the only thing this team has going for, is that Troy Weaver has at least a reasonable track record of identifying talent. Getting Bey wasn't worth paying Poole, but Bey is a valuable player. Queen outperformed his draft slot. The Detroit Pistons just won 60 games with a core Weaver drafted. There's some good things here, right? We know there's individually talented players on this team. Zion, when healthy, is a very good player. So is Trey Murphy. So is Herb Jones. Fears and Queen show a lot of promise. We like Saddiq Bey. There's things to like when it comes to this squad here. 100%. But the thing that really seems to knock the Pelicans down in this article is something that I've been talking a lot about too. And I know people in the comments here and elsewhere have been as well. Quote, but identifying an actual plan here is next to impossible. Running back a 26-win team makes no sense. Even if you could justify the individual decision to keep any single player, the whole here is in desperate need of a reboot. Queen and Williamson are defensively incompatible and have redundant offensive skill sets. Trey Murphy's trade value will never be higher than it is now, while he has several years of cost control left on his deal. The team has minimal shooting and only one notable defender in Herb Jones. Until Dumars and Weaver prove they have a real vision for this team, the Pelicans are doomed to the number 29 slot. I can't argue with anything that was just said there at all, right? This is what I've referred to as the two-timeline approach. You're trying to win now. You're also trying to build for the future. And neither of those things is going particularly well for the team. They don't look like a playoff team. The over-under for wins per FanDuel set at 29.5. We're going to talk about the rotation in the third segment of the show. Where do Fears and Queen exactly slot in? And I think that's tough to figure out as well if you want to give them, valuable reps. And yeah, I very much want to see them get valuable NBA like rotation minutes and things here. It's the lack of vision. I call it two timelines. I've seen Zach Lowe refer to it as directionless. Here it's saying we don't know what it is, right? It's not that it's directionless. It's just that you can't see it here. That seems to be the problem, having a vision and building towards that. And there doesn't necessarily seem to be like one unified vision that makes sense. There might be multiple visions, but they kind of compete against one another here. But that's not what I want to totally focus on, right? You've heard me say this. You don't need to hear me say this again. How does Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver and the rest of this franchise prove CBS wrong? It's not going to be with a press conference or anything like that. It's the vision needs to become clear, and we've got to see it on the court, right? Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver can prove CBS wrong, me wrong, and everybody wrong that's doubting them if Fears and Queen become cornerstone level players. You spent a lot of draft capital on Derik Queen. If Queen is just an okay player, that trade is not great. If Queen is a franchise-changing guy, okay, different conversation, right? You can also prove this by Zion and Queen working together, and this is something that Joe Dumars kind of doubled down on at the Jamal Mosley introductory press conference. You heard Sam Quinn say they are offensively redundant and incompatible defensively. Kind of, right? But this is the bet that Joe Dumars has made. If Mosley finds a way to make that pairing work, suddenly what looks incoherent looks a little bit more intentional. And Dumars said, I think they can fit. We referred to them as Tatum and Brown, even though those two players just got broken up. He needs these two players to work out. If they don't, and you end up trading away Zion at some point or whatever, it looks like a waste of time here. The other way that Dumars can kind of prove this wrong is make the playoffs, make the postseason. This is, I don't know if it's the easiest one or the hardest one here, but if you make the playoffs, even if it's through the play-in tournament, that's good for New Orleans. That is a team that was projected to win under 30 games right now. And if you can get into the postseason with that squad, if you win a game or two in the playoffs, even if you ultimately lose in the first round, that can be considered a successful season, I think. It shows that there is some vision here, particularly if you are developing the young guys in Fears and Queen here. I really wanted to kind of find a way to call CBS crazy. It would have made good content, right? But there just isn't anything to say no to that otherwise here. It's that lack of vision, or the lack of the vision being communicated, if there is one, that we just do not see yet. And they need to figure it out. They do eventually, I still think, need to pick a direction here, but winning will be a direction. Fears and Queen development can also be a direction here. I do note, when we talk a lot about Trey Murphy here, and I feel a little bit justified in this, when Sam Quinn says Trey Murphy's value is at an all-time high right now, I have long said that. I don't think keeping him for a year and trading him next offseason is going to actually mean that you get better offers for him. That does concern me here. And that's why I think when people look at this team, they're going to see players whose values are going to go down. And thus, if you end up being forced to choose a direction, say the team's not very good, all of a sudden then, did you just waste a lot of their value? And that is long time, an overall concern here, because this is a small market team that needs to be pretty smart on the margins. What do you think about the Pelicans being ranked 29th out of 30th, just ahead of the Sacramento Kings? The teams, by the way, right in front of them. The Portland Trail Blazers, they dropped in these rankings from their ranking in February at 19th, partially because of things like them being the owner being cheap, the Mike and Nori, their new head coach contract, trading for John Morant doesn't make sense. The Phoenix Suns are low in this one, even though they've done a good job around the margins here. You also have the Denver Nuggets, who are just failing right now, it feels like, around Nikola Jokic. The Milwaukee Bucks at 25th, the Lakers at 24th. These are the type of teams the Pelicans are kind of, in the running with here. And I can't really put the Pelicans above any of those squads right now. At least the Milwaukee Bucks found their direction by trading Giannis and the youth movement that they're going to go with here, even if they don't own their first round picks. Coming up next, we got a recurring segment for the next 5 weeks here on Locked On Pelicans. We are going to count down the top 25 franchise players. I'm going to tell you who I've picked at 25th. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. And if you're right, you're going to receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. And best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games. Whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league, every game has someone capable of going deep, and now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. Sometimes you've got a hitter who's been on a hot streak, a favorable pitching matchup, even a ballpark that tends to give up home runs. Those are always the first thing to look for before making your daily dingers pick. So are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of the MLB. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. It means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. You can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. Same place you watch your Pelicans play. For your second listen, by the way, it's Locked On NBA. Wes, Matt, and Hayes are covering all the biggest stories, the trade rumors. There's still some flying, new deals, all of those things over the Locked On NBA podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. We've got a recurring segment I'm going to do over the next couple of the weeks as we're kind of deep into the summer here. I have ranked the top 25 players in franchise history. And this goes back to when the Hornets relocated to New Orleans in the 02-03 season. So this does not count any of the New Orleans Jazz or anything like that. Technically, that history is owned by the Utah Jazz. So I'm only looking at history owned by the New Orleans Pelicans now. Essentially think of them as an expansion team that started in 02-03. So one of the things for this is only accomplishments count in New Orleans. I am not looking at, their overall NBA careers, and I'm going to factor in things like peak talent, longevity with the franchise, individual production, team success, and also the cultural significance, memorable moments that I think really impact things here, right? That's going to kind of impact somebody like Anthony Davis. It might help a guy like DeMarcus Cousins. So let's get into the 25th. We're going to start at 25. We're going to go through it. Feel free to come up with your own top 25 list. I'm starting at number 25 with Greivis Vasquez here. He only played 2 seasons in New Orleans, one of the reasons he's so low here. But that second season that he played here in New Orleans was legitimately really good. 14 points per game, 9 assists. He led the league in total number of assists, 4.3 rebounds per game. And what I find interesting about him is he was kind of a bridge type of player here. Chris Paul had left. Vasquez was here, and he was kind of the bridge between that era right after Chris Paul to when Anthony Davis arrived. That year where we just talked about his second year here in New Orleans was AD's rookie season. Eric Gordon wasn't consistently available. And so Vasquez became the guy that just organized everything, was like a true point guard for this New Orleans Pelicans team. And so he's someone that I vividly remember covering. I ran into him like a number of times throughout the city. Super friendly guy, kind of fun, exciting player. He has a number of like really memorable moments and really memorable games here. His best game, I think, as a Hornet is his triple-double against the Atlanta Hawks, February 8th, 2013. This is how far back we're going. 21 points, 12 assists, 11 rebounds in an 111-100 win over the Atlanta Hawks. First triple-double of his career. He was a plus 19 in 36 minutes in that game. His career high of 27 points came against Orlando. This was back on December 26, 2012. So the year before he had that like kind of breakout, or that was his breakout year here. The Pelicans had lost 11 straight games going into that one. Vasquez scores 27 points, hits 2 late free throws to really help seal a 97-94 win and end the skid, right? And get this team back on track. Those are the type of moments that like I very much just remember of those lost seasons, right? When it's like, oh, this team's not good at all. And they were not. He also had a 16 assist game, which was his season high that year. And again, he led the entire NBA with 704 total assists. January 1, by the way, 2013, he had earned the Western Conference Player of the Week. He wasn't just putting up like empty assist numbers on a bad team. He was getting some significant like league-wide recognition here. He was acquired right before the lockout shortened season. Initially came off the bench, but then just really solidified himself as the starting point guard for this group as New Orleans was kind of trying to find their way at the time. You were post the NBA owning the team. You're supposed to be entering the Anthony Davis era. And Vasquez was kind of the bridge, in my opinion, here, I think. And so those type of players matter to me. This is like a deep cut. And as I was putting together this top 25 list, it's not great. Like, I'm going to be honest. It is not particularly great at all of a list for New Orleans. So, when you look at some of these players, it's pretty interesting to see and to really think about. But Vasquez kind of having like a peak year like that, I think was pretty good. You could argue he was the face of a team at the time. He had a lot of personality to his game. He had memorable games. And so for like 2 seasons when like they were bad, it was nice to see someone like him just go out, try, fight, all of those things on a nightly basis. So I have Greivis Vasquez at 25th on my list. We're going to do, there will be a segment, unless something really comes up on a show, devoted to the top 25 guys that I have counting backwards. I mean, you can probably guess who's number 1. You might not guess who's number 2. You can definitely guess who's number 1. But we'll keep going through this list. There'll be at least a segment in every show going forward for the next 5 weeks. It's 25 people, and that is 5 shows a week at 5 weeks. Make it a little bit easier here in the summer. But I think this is kind of fun to look at. Also kind of reminds you like, the history here in New Orleans. Not too great overall, but Greivis Vasquez, 25th on my list of top 25 players since their inaugural season in 02-03. It's also the 25th year of the team, so kind of fits in with that as well. Coming up next, let's go back to kind of front office stuff, but the rotation, coaching, Fears and Queen, where they're going to slot in. That's what I think is pretty interesting and maybe the biggest remaining question we have. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Odoo. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place. So Odoo is one platform to manage, grow, and scale your business. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent. It's about having everyone working towards the same goal. And it's true in sports, just like it is in businesses here. When you look at a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, everyone is working towards creating like a first-class organization, from people at the top like Sam Presti, working their way down to people that just help the players and their families to create a top-tier experience here. So everyone is pulling in the same direction, not just one person, not just one player, not just one coach, not one front office executive. It's a coordinated effort across that entire organization to make it successful. So great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That is odoo.com/lockedon to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen, Saints not looking good the other day, but Ross Jackson covering it all over at the Locked On Saints podcast. Make sense of the black and gold, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the roster seems to be set. Trendon Watford seems to be the 15th man on this team, even if it's just a partial guarantee. You got the graphic and everything. That says something. Feels like he'll be on the team. The roster is set, but that doesn't mean that all of the questions are answered here, because Fears and Queen, where and how many minutes are they going to actually play this season? This is maybe the biggest question to me going into the start of training camp. Are Fears and Queen going to start? Because this team trying to make the playoffs doesn't feel like they're going to be starting these two players. They showed a lot last year, but it usually takes that magic third year when you see guys take a leap towards helping a team impact winning in a positive way. It's not universal, but you see that about like 75% of the time here, that if it's going to happen, it's usually in that like third year at the earliest. So Fears and Queen second-year players will make strides and look better, but maybe they're not going to help you win games just yet. So my projected starting lineup feels something along the lines of DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Yves Missi. That means Fears and Queen coming off the bench. And so then that leads to the question of how many minutes are you willing to give these young guys when you're also trying to win games? You know, if they're not helping you win, do you need to shorten your rotation? Do you need to reduce their minutes? Or do you keep toughing it out and hope that you can just get by here? You know, Derik Queen is too important of both these guys are too important of a player to just treat like a developmental project, right? Queen in particular, you made the trade. He showed what he could do as a rookie. You know, 22 minutes per game or something along those lines, like, doesn't make a lot of sense to me, I think. And when you look at, you know, how their minutes went down when the team was like really pushing for the 10th spot right around when DeJounte Murray came back, is that what it's going to be again? And that's what I am uncertain of when it comes to this team. Derik Queen played 25 minutes per game. You figure it's at least going to be that number. But a reserve is often going to play, you know, a little bit less than that, I think. But if you're going to play him more, then he's going to play 28 to 32 minutes. And so where do those minutes come from? And that's the real question to me with all of this. You know, if Derik Queen plays 30 minutes and Zion Williamson is playing 32 to 34 minutes, you're going to have a significant amount of Zion and Queen minutes. There's no way around this sort of thing. You can't hide from that pairing at all, which means Jamal Mosley's going to need to figure it out. But what if they just don't work? What if they just don't work? And if that's the case, do you drop Queen's minutes then because you didn't move Zion Williamson and you're trying to win games, right? You know, that's the type of thing. Also, you know, if this franchise believes Queen is a foundational type of player, you can't develop him entirely around what makes Zion Williamson's game work. Queen needs possessions as the offensive hub. That means taking the ball out of Zion Williamson's hands, right? He needs post touches. He needs reps closing games. He needs reps defending the right kind of people. That's difficult to do for him if you're playing him and Zion Williamson together because, again, we talked about it in the first segment. There's a level of redundancy there. Similar thing for Jeremiah Fears. He needs real point guard minute reps, not just go out there on the court, handle the ball, let Zion handle the ball, and you be a spot-up shooter. Or when you're out there with DeJounte Murray, you're off ball. No, you need him to control the offense, right? If he's getting around 28-ish minutes per game and he was playing 26 minutes per game last year, a little bit under that, do these minutes go down? But it's not just about minutes. As we just talked about with Queen, it's about the right role, the right fit when it comes to this sort of thing. Mosley's going to be put in a pretty difficult decision of, are you willing to live with these young guys making mistakes because their upside matters more? And look, they gave Mosley a 5-year deal, so maybe he is because there is no actual pressure on him to be able to win games. But if the edict from up top is like, you better win, again, these things conflict and it creates problems here. I don't want Fears just being a spot-up shooter or being reduced to something like that. Working off ball. You drafted him to be your point guard of the future. One of the things to also consider with these two guys is, should Fears and Queen be playing together as much as possible? These are the two guys that you drafted to be the future. Both of them in the lottery here. Fears and Queen need to figure out their two-man game. When Queen wants the ball, when Fears needs the ball, how do you play make with both those guys? If you put them both out there with Zion, they're working around Zion. They're not really building the reps with each other in the same way. And then whether Fears or Queen start or not, are they even going to be finishing games here? Maybe they're starting, but are they going to be finishing games? And I think that's an open question here. It's going to be interesting how they kind of sort out what to do with competing priorities as, again, it feels somewhat directionless. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLAJake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be back with y'all tomorrow.